My name is Nora Ellison, and I'm 35 years old. I've spent most of my life cataloging other people's memories as an archivist at the Seattle Maritime Museum letters, ship logs, fragments of history too fragile to survive without care. I thought that skill would keep me safe from chaos. I was wrong. 3 days ago, my father came home from Egypt without my grandfather. He rolled his suitcase through the doorway like a man returning from an ordinary business trip, not a betrayal. His shirt was pressed, his watch gleamed, and his voice was almost tender when he said, Cairo was good for him. He needed the sun. I asked where Grandpa was. Dad didn't pause while hanging his coat. He wanted to stay longer. You know how he is restless. The lie was so casual it barely made a sound. Grandpa Howard Ellison wasn't restless. At 82, he still walked every morning to the pier, polished the brass railing of his boat, and checked his accounts with the precision of a man who'd built a fortune ship by ship. He wouldn't vanish without a word. That night, while the house slept under its new silence, I opened Grandpa's old travel folder. His passport was gone. His itinerary ended mid-sentence at Cairo International. My hands trembled as I ran my thumb over the indentation of his handwriting. Return April 12th. The date had passed. When my phone buzzed after midnight, I expected another bank alert. Instead, a single text appeared from an unknown number, country code +120. He's alive, and he left you something. The screen light flickered across the blueprints on his desk, the ones Dad had promised to redesign. Outside, Lake Washington shimmered like metal. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like it was waiting. By morning, the mansion no longer sounded like home. The hammering started before breakfast men my father had hired were tearing down the wall between the study and the library. He said he wanted light, space, a fresh start. I stood in the hallway, watching dust float through a shaft of sunlight where my grandfather's portrait used to hang. Dad's voice carried from the next room, smooth and confident as ever. He was on the phone with a lawyer, confirming something about title adjustments and accelerated transfers. When he saw me, he smiled in that practiced way that never reached his eyes. Your grandfather would have wanted progress. Nora, sentiment keeps people poor. He handed me a box and told me to take anything nostalgic before the movers came. Inside were ledgers, old fountain pens, and a brass compass engraved with my grandfather's initials. I brushed the dust off the glass case that held his model ship, Solace. Its sails were yellowed, the rope lines frayed, but he'd always kept it near the window, where the morning light hit the tiny carved bow. By noon, the workers had left, and the house fell into that strange quiet that follows disruption. I walked from room to room, the dining table still set for 3, a sweater folded on the armchair, the smell of cedar lingering in the hall. It felt less like a renovation and more like an erasure. A sharp knock startled me. A courier stood on the porch, holding a plain envelope stamped with a Cairo postmark. My name was written in my grandfather's blocky handwriting. Inside was a single slip of paper, creased once down the center. Open what I left beneath Solace. The air in the room shifted. I turned toward the glass case, the model ship glowing faintly in the afternoon light, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally listen. I waited until the house fell silent again before unlocking the glass case. The key was still in its usual place, tucked beneath the drawer of my grandfather's desk. The hinges groaned softly as I lifted the lid, the scent of varnish and salt dust rising from the old model. Solace had been built from teak and patience. Every plank hand-painted, every sail stitched by his own hands. I set it on the desk under the window and examined the hull. My fingers traced along the keel until they found a seam that didn't belong, a faint ridge, almost invisible. With the edge of a letter opener, I pried it open. A small compartment slid free, lined with velvet. Inside was a silver flash drive, no larger than my thumb. A single label on it read, Blue Harbor. My chest tightened as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, revealing a folder of video files named by dates. The first opened to a shaky recording my father, sitting across from a man in a dim office, a notary stamp visible on the desk. He won't notice, not with the new medication. We'll make it look like a voluntary transfer, my father's voice said. The man nodded. And the property deeds, they'll be signed before we fly out. By the time he realizes, it'll be done. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing too loudly in the empty room. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I reached for my phone and dialed the only person I trusted to think before speaking. Leah Park. She answered, her tone warm and measured. We hadn't talked in months, not since she left the Attorney General's office to join a private firm. Leah, it's Nora. I found something. It's proof. An hour later, she was at the mansion, rain clinging to her coat. We watched the recordings together in silence until she exhaled slowly. Your grandfather didn't just suspect him. She said, he prepared for this. This is a legal trapdoor. The flash drive sat between us like a fuse waiting for fire. I realized my grandfather hadn't left me a mystery. He'd left me a choice. The diary was bound in cracked brown leather, its pages thin as parchment. I found it folded inside the same box that had once held my grandfather's medals, each page marked in his careful, deliberate script. The first entry began on hotel stationery, its header faintly embossed Cairo. February 14th. Martin says the desert will remind me of what I built from nothing. I don't think he understands that sand can swallow anything, even memory. The words blurred slightly where the ink had run. I imagined him writing in the flicker of lamplight, the air heavy with dust. We stood before the pyramids. He smiled too easily, the way he used to when he lied about his grades as a boy. I let him hold my passport, my wallet, small concessions to keep the peace. Perhaps that was my mistake. Peace with the wrong man is surrender. The next page was dated the following day. He said he wanted to see the Saqqara step tombs. Halfway through the drive, he asked the guide to stop. You need rest. Dad. His voice trembled, not with worry but rehearsal. Then the car door closed. I watched the taillights fade into a mirage. I turned the page, my throat tightening. An hour passed. The sun felt like judgment. A truck driver stopped a man named Youssef. He remembered the maritime foundation that built schools near Alexandria. You are Mr. Ellison, he said. We don't leave men behind in our country. He gave me water and drove me back to Cairo. The entries grew steadier, his tone less frail. At the consulate, they gave me coffee in silence. I told them I would not press charges until I set my own house in order. Justice must be clean, not quick. The desert strips you down to what you truly own, your conscience. I closed the diary carefully, my hands trembling. Outside, wind rippled across Lake Washington, whispering against the glass. I could almost hear his voice beneath it, patient, unbroken, waiting for his moment to return. Rain had just started to fall when I pulled into the driveway, the kind of steady Seattle rain that soaks through everything before you realize it's happening. The house glowed faintly from the inside gold light spilling through the entryway. For a moment I thought Dad had come home early, that I'd have to face him with the secret sitting on my laptop like a live wire. Then I saw the silhouette. A man stood by the window, tall, leaning on a cane. My breath caught. The front door opened before I reached it. Hello? Nora, my grandfather said. His voice was rasped by travel, but unmistakably alive. His skin was browned by sun, his eyes pale and clear as glass. I dropped my bag and stepped forward, half laughing, half crying. I don't understand how did you Paris, he said simply, with a tired smile. The consulate arranged a quiet return. I wanted to see what my son would do when he thought the world had stopped watching. He set his cane beside the wall and looked around the foyer, taking in the bare patches on the walls where his portraits had hung. Martin's already redecorating. I see. Good. Let him think he's building something. I made tea, though neither of us drank much of it. He spoke softly, every word deliberate. We'll do this right, Nora. Law, not vengeance. The evidence must speak louder than anger. I nodded, opening my laptop to show him the flash drive and the recordings. He watched only the first minute, then closed it gently. Enough, he said. The rest belongs to the court, not to rage. Leah arrived after dark, still in her work clothes, hair damp from the rain. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Mr. Ellison," she whispered. "You're hard to get rid of." He finished, a small smile playing at his mouth. They spoke quietly about injunctions and filings, the calm rhythm of legality replacing the chaos that had ruled the house. When Leah left, the night felt heavier but cleaner. Grandpa walked through each room, touching the furniture as if greeting old friends. "Don't tell your father yet," he said before heading upstairs. Some truths need to find their own way to the door. The light in the hall stayed on long after he'd gone to bed, the soft hum of it steady as a heartbeat. Martin returned on a Thursday afternoon, his silver sedan cutting through the drizzle like a blade. From the window upstairs, I watched him step out of the car, straighten his tie, and look up at the house with satisfaction, the kind of look people give when they believe they've won. The movers had finished the week before. Boxes labeled Howard's office and attic storage were stacked neatly by the garage, waiting for disposal. I stayed in the kitchen with my phone hidden beneath a newspaper, Leah's number already dialed in case anything went wrong. My grandfather stood in the foyer, his navy cardigan buttoned, his cane steady against the marble. His posture was calm, almost ceremonial, when the key turned in the front door. The silence inside the house seemed to draw breath. "Welcome back, son," Howard said, his voice soft but clear. "I have a surprise for you." The sound of the door closing echoed like a gavel. For a split second, Martin froze. Then his expression shifted, confusion chased quickly by disbelief. "You," he started, then caught himself. "You're home. Thanks to the kindness of strangers," my grandfather replied. "Something you might try learning about." Before Martin could answer, the doorbell rang. I moved to open it, and a tall woman in a dark coat stepped inside, rain still clinging to her shoulders. "Agent Ramos, Federal Financial Crimes Division," she said, flashing her credentials. "We'd like a few minutes of your time. Mr. Ellison." Martin's face drained of color. There must be some mistake. Agent Ramos opened a slim folder. "We've reviewed the materials submitted under the file name Blue Harbor. I believe you're familiar with them." Howard didn't speak. He simply rested both hands on his cane and watched his son unravel. Martin tried for charm, then for anger, then for silence. None of it worked. Ramos set a document on the console table and nodded to me. For the record, I pressed play on my phone. My father's recorded voice filled the air, cold and unmistakable. Howard exhaled slowly, the faintest sound of relief beneath the tension. "You always wanted the house, Martin," he said quietly. "Now you have to live inside the walls you built." The agent didn't bring handcuffs, but she didn't need to. The look on his face said he'd already worn them for years. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and paper, a clean scent that tried to disguise everything rotten underneath. My father sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, eyes forward, hands clasped too tightly to look confident. Across from him, my grandfather's cane rested against the chair leg, steady as a silent witness. When my name was called, I walked to the stand and felt the distance between us stretch wider than the aisle I crossed. The clerk swore me in. My voice barely trembled when I said, "I do." Martin's lawyer, a man named Peters, smiled as if the trial were a polite debate. "Ms. Ellison," he began, "you've always been close to your grandfather, haven't you? Would it be fair to say you influenced his decisions after your mother passed?" I met his gaze. "I influenced him to eat more vegetables and take his medication. That's all." He flipped through a binder, and yet, shortly after returning from Egypt, Mr. Howard Ellison transferred every major asset to a charitable foundation with you as successor trustee? Convenient, isn't it? Leah rose before I could answer. Objection. The witness didn't draft or execute those documents. Overruled, the judge said mildly. Answer the question. It's not convenient. I said, it's deliberate. He wanted transparency. That's why he recorded everything. At Leah's cue, the screen lit up. My father's voice filled the room again, smooth, persuasive, unmistakable. The words about medication, signatures, and voluntary transfer played against the quiet hum of the ceiling fans. I didn't look at him, but I could feel his stare burn the air between us. When the recording ended, the judge leaned forward. The evidence demonstrates intent to defraud and undue influence, she said, each word like a nail being driven. The deed is void. Ownership remains with Mr. Howard Ellison. Mr. Martin Ellison's accounts are hereby frozen pending restitution review. My father didn't move. The verdict hung in the stillness like a bell's final note. I stepped down from the stand, passing close enough to hear his breath hitch. I paused only once, speaking softly, not for the court, but for him. Love doesn't excuse betrayal, I said. It just explains why it hurts more. The morning after the verdict, the house was quiet again. No workers, no lawyers, no reporters leaning against the gates. Just the lake outside, silver under the pale light, and the low hum of the world moving forward. Grandpa sat at the dining table with a cup of tea and a small stack of papers bound in blue ribbon. He looked stronger than he had in months, his posture straight, his tone calm. I've made my decision, he said. It's time the Ellison name meant something more than property. He handed me the documents. The first page bore the seal of an international foundation, the Ellison Maritime Trust, headquartered in Alexandria, Egypt. Its mission to fund apprenticeships for young shipbuilders and engineers along the Mediterranean coast. Every line of it was written in his firm, precise language, his legacy mapped out with the clarity of a man who'd seen both poverty and power and chosen what mattered most. The mansion, the docks, the portfolio, they belong to the foundation now. He said, the money should keep others afloat, not keep us comfortable. I blinked hard, trying to hide the ache in my throat. And Dad, he smiled faintly, not unkindly. He's getting the North Harbor Division, the one he ignored. It's struggling, but not beyond repair. Let him learn the weight of real work. If he wants redemption, he'll find it there. For a moment, the silence between us was almost tender. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth flickering across the blueprints he'd kept all his life. Mercy isn't weakness. Nora, he said quietly, it's the hardest form of justice. A man must earn his peace the way he once earned his fortune, through labor, not inheritance. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Outside, the lake wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and cedar. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like something being rebuilt, not from gold, but from grace. 6 months passed before I saw my father again. His name appeared occasionally in the company updates, short reports about the North Harbor Division slowly stabilizing under new oversight. He attended safety meetings, clocked his hours, and signed his paychecks like any other employee. There were no headlines, no speeches, just the quiet repetition of effort. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was something that looked like the beginning of it. When spring came, I flew to Egypt for the Foundation's first scholarship ceremony. The flight path traced the same route they had taken before everything fell apart. Through the airplane window, the Nile cut through the land like a long memory, steady, unwavering, forgiving. The event took place in Alexandria's old shipyard, where salt air met the smell of oil and paint. Young apprentices in blue overalls stood beside half-built boats, their laughter rising above the clatter of tools. Each student carried the Ellison crest on their sleeve, stitched in white thread. Grandpa couldn't travel anymore, but his voice played through a small recording. "Build what lasts," he said, "and treat every storm as a teacher." The crowd applauded softly, and I felt my throat tighten. After the ceremony, I walked down to the riverbank. The light shimmered across the water, the same pale gold I imagined from his diary pages. A fisherman offered me a cup of mint tea and asked if I was visiting family. I smiled and said yes, though the one I meant was oceans away. The wind carried sand from the desert's edge, fine and warm against my skin. I realized the desert hadn't just taken something from us. It had stripped away the illusions we'd built around love, success, and control. What remained was smaller, truer, and alive. Winter came softly that year. The lake froze at the edges, the trees outside the mansion bare and silver. My grandfather's health had begun to fade, the way light dims before sunset slowly, almost tenderly. He spent his last weeks near the window, watching the water and dictating letters for the foundation. His voice had grown thin, but his mind stayed sharp. One morning, the nurse called me upstairs. He was gone, his hand resting on the arm of his chair, his face calm as if he had only fallen asleep. Outside, the sky was just beginning to turn pink. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet that follows the end of something good. The memorial was small, just family and a few former sailors who'd worked for him decades ago. The air smelled faintly of cedar and rain. I was standing near the front when I saw my father slip in through the side door, wearing a dark coat and carrying an envelope. He didn't look at me, only approached the table where the foundation's donation box sat. He placed the envelope there and whispered something I couldn't hear. When he turned, our eyes met briefly, no anger, no pride, only exhaustion and something that looked almost like acceptance. After the service, I walked outside to the dock where Grandpa used to stand with his morning coffee. The lake was still, sunlight glinting across the water in pale gold threads. I could hear his voice again, the words he'd told me once while tightening the rigging on Solace. An inheritance is something you receive. A legacy is something you build. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and salt. For the first time, I felt light enough to let go, and steady enough to carry on.